So this topic is an intro to Open RAN security. And what we basically want to discuss is how is Open RAN designed with security in mind. And I'd still say it's still in its early stages. Okay? And we need to understand current state and its direction. And there's a lot of discussions in risk assessments, threat modeling, challenges at Open RAN, and best practices and frameworks that we could use, not only in Open RAN, but also in our own other IT infrastructure. It's going to be very beneficial with using frameworks such as the NIST cybersecurity framework, CIS critical security controls, among others. Okay. So, we're discussing threat modeling, security controls and risks, zero trust architecture, NIST cybersecurity framework, CIS critical security controls and benchmark. And we'll summarize today with some key learning points, and I'll show you my references for this presentation. Okay, so what is actually Open RAN security? But we need to delve first. What does open mean in Open RAN? So the main goal is using Open RAN to have interoperability standards for various RAN elements. And the open here refers to intentional capability of the software and hardware and or interface. Okay, so while it is using a lot of these components, most likely would be using open source, but it's not fully open source. You could have, if you're developing for Open RAN, you could have your own proprietary components here, or you could design yourself from the ground up. But let's say for those that's going to be using some sort of operating system under items and components, I doubt that you're going to be developing your own kernel and full operating system on that matter. Most will be using a form of Linux, embedded Linux for that matter. Hardware could also be open source, but again, not necessarily. You could also design, implement your own. But really, the main driving force here for the term open would be open interfaces. And as we have been discussing on the previous slide, as ORAN Alliance also said, Open RAN is not necessarily open source, while we would be using a lot of open source when developing and implementing Open RAN. Okay. So the current state for our threat Open RAN security. So the threat modeling and remediation analysis is the most mature part of Open RAN. Requirement specification ongoing. It's already mature, but there's still a lot of development here. There's also protocol specification. You can see here, for security, they're mainly focusing on common protocols that we've already known and implemented in our various IT infrastructure, TLS, DTLS, SSH, IPsec, among others. And there's also test specification because as the requirement specification progresses, they also have to modify yung mga test specifications here. Okay. For documentations, we have ORAN components interfaces, O1, A1, 3GPPs, front hole. They are already available and mature. Other interfaces, while the document's a bit dated, there has been progress here. Some are already, I would say, finalized then. Okay. Now, for our Open RAN security in 5G documentation, so Open RAN Policy Group has published a briefer, it's just 4 pages about Open RAN security in 5G. And when we're conducting this course, we are requesting our students, at least on the security class, to be able to read and digest this and a lot of other documentations. And they will be creating a one-pager key highlights and takeaways just to ensure that they understand the document. Then we have NIS Cooperation Group reports on Open RAN security. This one is a bit bigger, 31 pages, and estimated reading length is around 2 hours. It's a bit technical. But again, it's going to be digested into a one-pager key highlights and takeaways. Okay. In ORAN security risk, this was based on Ericsson. They wanted to state that there has been an expanded threat surface because in the previous implementations where you have single vendor end-to-end deployment, that's what Ericsson, Nokia, and the rest are doing. And Open RAN tried to break apart this single vendor deployment, no, into where you could mix and match various vendors as long as they are ORAN compliant and they are interoperable. So Ericsson raised that. Okay, so now you have multiple components that you need to protect. No? Other in the previous generation is just one monolithic big system that and you have only one vendor to talk to. Now, when you break apart radio access network, you now have multiple vendors to talk to if you don't buy, and implement components on ORAN from a single vendor. There's also need to close security vulnerabilities, especially associated with the near real-time RAN intelligence controller. They would also want to address, ORAN to address, threat to trust chain introduced by decoupling of functions. So you mentioned that the previous implementations of before Open RAN would be a single vendor deployment. Now we have decoupled a lot of these functions to various vendors. Okay. They also want to ensure management interfaces, are secured according to industry best practices and practice a higher level of due diligence, for exposure to public exploits from use of open source code. I just do have an issue on the last statement of Ericsson here because there's always been a battle of which is more secure, open source or proprietary codes, and both sides has their pros and cons, where they would occasionally, not occasionally, we would find vulnerabilities in open source code that has been there for a decade or more. And we were thinking before that if the system is open source, someone might have already seen the vulnerability and propose a solution for it, but that's not always the case. Most of us would just be downloading this and using those codes to implement it in our system. On the other side, on proprietary softwares, you cannot see the source code, right? And there could be vulnerabilities there that's not technically easily exposed. So I think that's the main difference here. It's if anyone would be looking hard enough on open source, since the source code is available, they would be looking for vulnerabilities would be a lot easier in open source than proprietary. But that does not mean proprietary does not have vulnerabilities. There are still vulnerabilities in proprietary code, and we've been seeing it for time to time. And Windows are still issuing, Microsoft is still issuing patches for Windows and Microsoft Office. Apple also releasing patches for both iOS and macOS. Linux also have, well, it's open source, so they're also issuing patches for vulnerabilities and features update. And then lastly, from Ericsson, implement defenses from physical attacks, which should be the case. And with RAN network, you typically would at least have your base station with antennas and fiber connectivities from to the central location. So of course you don't want this equipment, expensive equipment, to be prone to physical attacks, from pilferage, from theft, or just plain vandalism. So you need to also implement basic, depending on the location. You could implement basic physical defenses like maybe a wall with CCTV cameras, for your basic base station, but from a location that is highly likely to be attacked from physical, then you might need armed guards, and even roving dogs, to protect your installations here. Okay. So for the ORAN threat modeling, they have divided this to various components. So one of those would be assets, where they have on the sub-asset categories, you have 30 data interface assets, 12 component assets. Another module will be threats, and they have subdivided this to threats against ORAN, threats against OCloud, threats to open source software, threats to physical security, threats against radio networks, and threats against machine learning. Okay. Another module is discussing about the stakeholders. So they have subdivided this to MNOs, tech providers, tech administrators, integrators, and testers, and another module for attackers. So what type of attackers is ORAN expecting? So you have cyber criminals that wants to earn money through cybercrime. You got cyber terrorists to have something to say, no? And cause disruptions, no? On your infrastructure. You got hacktivists who wants to make a statement by defacing or causing disruptions on your environment. There's also nation states, advanced persistent threats who could be there, no, for various reasons, just for monitoring, espionage, or even acting as a cyber terrorist, no, when the need arises. So, and then lastly, there's insider threat, where an internal employee, no, or operator from the operator side could be acting as a threat actor. Again, for various reasons, no, they could be just curious, no, on what they could do there. They could be technically a cyber criminal, no, wanting to gain additional advantage, no, based on their access and knowledge on how the network works. Or they could be coerced, no, or blackmailed by nation state APTs, no, to perform tasks on their behalf, no? So this is great consideration. And technically across all of this, no, it's the insider threat that's very dangerous, no, for ORAN, because they could really do a lot of damage. There's also security measures component, no, where there is a inside threat modeling documentation, requirement specification documentation, protocol specification. And then lastly, for the risk assessment, no, they have 3 levels. No? So once they have considered all of those modules, they would put a tag on it on risk assessment and state, no, what kind of risk are we looking at? Is it a low risk, unlikely to happen, and if it does happen, it's going to be low impact, no, or is it a medium risk, no, that could cause disruption, no, but something still recoverable, or high, no, that is very catastrophic for our environment. So and then once they have seen the threat modeling with risk assessment, then they could prioritize, no, what could we solve, with what control, and at what cost, no? And then they would perform the remediation. Okay. So for the threat modeling, this is based on SecurityGen. So you got your assets definition here on the top. You got your threat definition here at the bottom, and they're trying to map it out with threat to asset mapping, where you have your threats and then you map it out with your attackers, vulnerability, what assets are affected, and components too. And then it would be addressed, no? Depending on the risk model, or risk assessment from the model. What is the impact of the threat on privacy, confidentiality, integrity, and availability? So if you've been into security, no, or have read or encountered, no, security components, no, typically you'll see, no, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. But at ORAN, no, they are already considering privacy, no, as a separate component, no, which should be the case. Okay. Okay. So risk analysis based on German organization PSI. No? So they have produced a document which is very comprehensive, no, and they have mapped this with these modules in mind. No? So we got ORAN risk analysis based on the victim perspective, and the victim would be either the end user, the state or society, or the telecom operator. No? And then from attacker's perspective, no, again they have the end user as an attacker, outsiders from the network, insiders, and even the RAN service provider. No? Maybe if you're interconnecting with other various RAN providers, no? They could be a component where they are compromised or they're the one themselves attacking. You know. And then also attack perspective to the cloud service provider. Next, we have assets. No? They have decouple this as OCloud, the interfaces, the apps, and the machine learning components of the assets. And then the possible targets would be, of course, the confidentiality, integrity, availability. They have authenticity. And then lastly, privacy. For security measures, they have adopted a lot from 3GPP, and there's also new components. Since this is ORAN is uh, a new item, they have also recommended various security measures that weren't covered with 3GPP standard before. And for the risk assessment, they still follow the low, medium to high risk assessment based on this. And what BSI did was to measure the risk for a victim type when an attacker aims at a certain target, and which an asset that is or not protected by security controls. And it's interesting on how they would map it out. Okay. So per assessment, they would have this table and they have this traffic light protocol where they would identify, green would be low severity, which I would say is protected with security controls. Um, and you're mapping it out now if an attacker is an outsider, user, or an insider. Okay, from the outsider, at least end user is mostly protected from the CIAZP components. But maybe what you could get away from here, is that typically for an insider that's going to be attacking the ORAN network, there's really not much control I could do about it. So while there are something now we could do, like separation of duties, maker and checker, forced leave, so that banks have been doing this, other agencies have been doing this, where they are forcing employees to leave for 5 straight days, and have someone take over that job to ensure that no weird stuff is happening with the task of that insider, or that user. And it's been a good check and balance for quite some time. But this just shows that if it's an insider that's going to be turning rogue against our infrastructure, then this ORA, as with any organization, I would say this would most likely apply to any organization with minor tweaks too. It's going to be hard to protect against an insider threat. Okay. And well, this is just an example of one of the risk analysis of BSI against 5G RAN. There is a document that they released. It's 79 pages, but it's very comprehensive 5G RAN risk analysis. For the class, it was estimated 5 hours of reading time. So next, we have discussions on top risks. So this is from the SMOs. So leakage of network and information data is very critical if this has happened, because it would contain configurations, topology, network KPIs, and OCloud KPIs. So we don't want this data to be out in the open, or have someone not in your infrastructure or organization have access to this. Any attacks could cause, of course, denial service, degradation, and maybe control of the infrastructure, where ORAN function descriptors could be tampered, configuration could be tampered, attacks from the SMO leading to compromise, or SMO to ORAN functions. For security controls, SMOs, you need to have, if you're going to be SMO, you need to have data storage protections where you encrypt sensitive data. And this goes as with any data storage protection. This pertains to most likely data at rest. So storing data, it has to be encrypted. And anyone that's not authorized will not have the decryption keys to be able to read and make sense out of it. Any functions, per function should be restricted with access to data buckets. For access control, nothing new here. They are requesting that you need to have strong password policies. Not requesting, they are mandating. You need to have strong password policies with multi-factor authentication. So it's not gonna be common, hopefully, for Open RAN deployment, where you could gain access to a system with just a username and a password. As we've seen, no, with current cyber attack, no, this would be the easiest way for anyone, no, who had evil intentions against your infrastructure to gain access. No? So by if they target, no, on Open RAN deployment, they could just be looking for LinkedIn profiles of engineers um, that is employed in your organization, no, and target them with a phishing campaign. No? And if you don't have an MFA, you know, and they were hooked with a phishing campaign and they provided the username and the password, then that's technically all they need, no, to gain access to infrastructure. With MFA, no, at least you are minimizing that time, no, that they could log into your organization's infrastructure, because the OTP based MFA, no, would last maybe 30 seconds. No? And if they weren't able to log in within that time frame, then it's somehow protected. Or if they were able to log in, no, at least if they logged out, no, or their session ended, they would need to gain an OTP again for them to be able to get in. That said, I would strongly, no, advise you that MFA is not a silver bullet. No? It doesn't solve all your problems. We've seen e-wallets, our banks here, no, accounts being attacked because attackers are very clever also hooking, no, targets to provide the OTP too. No? So, well, if take a look at it from the user's perspective. No? The user already gave out the username and the password, and when the page or the phishing page asks for the OTP, chances are they would also input the OTP because they are expecting that. So it's not a silver bullet. There are technologies in place to have this stronger, like YubiKeys, no, that uses universal two-factor authentication. So might want to take a look at that. But again, for this one, no, since we're still not in the passwordless era, we're still gonna be credential based. No? They are uh, requiring, no, that any access to systems must have multi-factor authentication. And since part of access control, they also want to include, no, role-based access control, where it's least privilege too. No? So when you log in based on what type of account you're supposed to do, you would be contained on what you could do to the system. This is also in anticipation with breach in mind. No? In case your account gets compromised, you would do minimal damage, hopefully. And hopefully, the system or your security operations, no, would be able to detect that anomaly, no, and yak you out of the network. It's your account. Okay. Again, we don't want everyone to be an admin and then free for all. No? It's going to be very hard to track. No? So you want to limit what items, what functions could a user do based on their, well, job description. SMOs must also be wary, no, of softwares and artifacts lifecycle, where you need to be aware, no, of the supply chain, no? Especially when using open source. No? There have been some cases where a contributor, no, in open source, or a maintainer even, no, have evil intentions and was able to inject the malicious code. Siguro the latest I could think about was the XV um, compression function, no? Where it was used also in SSH, no? And it was discovered that someone the new maintainer, no, tampered that open source project, no? Inserted a backdoor, and one Microsoft engineer uh, was able to discover that, yeah, there is a delay on my SSH login, no? And started analyzing, no? And they found the backdoor. So not sure how lucky we will be, no? On other, no? There are millions of open source projects, no? Not sure if every one of them would be clean, no? See. Also, version control, safe CI/CD practices, then anti-tampering, no, techniques with using digital signatures. So especially for updating firmwares, no, on your RAN components, you don't want just any software, no, to be able to update and flash your RAN components. No? So ideally, it's gonna be signed. No, not ideally. It should be signed, no, before your system would accept these patches or updates. Okay? Any weird stuff that doesn't match this digital signature should raise an alarm, and you should not apply it on your environment. So this should be a mandatory requirement too. Okay. Orchestrations. Now we have risk. No? ORAN does not want, no, and cannot replicate the work done by other SDOs, no, regarding orchestration. So they want basically some sort of reuse. No? So attacks related to orchestration can be as sophisticated as to manipulate the service logic or aim, no? At service degradation. No? If basically they don't want full disruption, no? But let's say a competitor logs in as an attacker in your network, and they don't want outage. They just want to drop specific radio signals to have your users be infuriated. No? Because if they shut it down, you're gonna be trying to recover it fast. No? But if they are just dropping here and there, no? It could be service degradation and some sort of still of a denial of service. No? But it's not gonna be easy, no? to troubleshoot. And of course, acquisition list, no, they could target the automation aspects of Open RAN, which would be very catastrophic if you have to do everything manually. No? One of the main goal of Open RAN is have everything run, no, automated. There would still be, of course, some of the manual component, but this would greatly reduce the manpower required to operate an ORAN environment. No? But if the orchestration fails, which also implies that automation will fail. No? Now you have to do everything manually until you get the system back up. For the O Cloud, you got implementations, no, to follow several models. So, private telco cloud, hyperscaler edge cloud, hybrid models, and even when sticking to ETSI and network function virtualizations, no, you would still be dealing with O Cloud one way or the other. So you got your risk, no, on computing infrastructure, host OS, container secure deployment, virtual machine isolation. For IAM, you got your user and application level risks, resource identification authorization. For the data, you got the data at rest and in transit risk. So while the previous slides, no, at rest means you have to encrypt your data that you are storing. In transit, no, all data should be encrypted too. So hence the requirement that all transmission at least, no, must support TLS. To ensure it's encrypted. For the networking, they are requiring separation of network segments and slices. So you should not see an ORAN deployment that's on one big flat network, no? As what I've seen on some of the previous telco deployments. No? It's one big flat network and everything's there, including management network. No? So that's no in Open RAN. They want you to separate segments. Separating segments would also mean you have some sort of active protection, because you could now define that this segment is a management network, so I could only supposed to see here SSH and HTTPS, no, for web management, and all of this could be defined, no, from a client workstations for management to specific appliances. So, and any thing, no, aside from that network traffic, you could raise an alarm. No? That's not supposed to happen. So even if a single workstation tried to ping, no, an appliance, no, and it's not part of the, let's say, network analytics rules, no, then that could raise an alarm. No? Why is this workstation trying to ping? It might be actively looking for components, so that could be a sign of a precursor to an attack. Again, this allows you to be able to compartmentalize, no, network traffic and expected, no, behavior. But this has to be done by design, no, from the start. And not only for O Cloud, no, even for your internal network once you start to deploy it. But even again, this, if you take a look at this fall under O Cloud. So even within the O Cloud environment, you should have separate network segments. Should not be one big pie. Mentioned software life cycle here from OS and network functions, starting from boot and during the DevOps cycles. Now, how do they patch? Are the patches and features update that the DevOps is generating and been tested properly? Um, we don't want to cause outage, no? Like what happened with a security vendor last July, no? They probably haven't tested that patch and push it to production, and everyone mostly got blue screen. No? So again, this has to do with your software lifecycle and testing process too. Oh, it's implied there. There's also awareness and countermeasures where events are being logged and analyzed. My goal here is to stay na log as much as possible as you can. Because the last thing you want is something went wrong, and when you're trying to analyze what happened, you don't have any logs to determine what actually caused the outage, no, or issue. And that comes with, you need to be able to inspect these logs, this telemetry, you need to be able to detect any anomaly. And for the most part, you need to have protections already in place. No? And if there's any event or instances that you have detected something that you don't have any protection, okay, you have to do risk analysis at that point again. No? So is it low, is it medium, is it high risk? What kind of control could you put in place? Is this an attack? Is this a bug? Okay, and do our remediation accordingly. Okay. And for this one, we have ORAN, Security Focus Group, no, that did a study on OCloud 2.0. It is a bit hefty, no, 95 pages, and I would say around 5 hours, no, of you call this reading. Now, how do we enforce, no, this one? ORAN recommends and actually mandates, no, that you need to perform penetration testing on your environment. No? And um, when doing penetration testing, no, we need to be aware that it is different from a vulnerability assessment. So typically, you'll have that in a service, no, internally or externally. You could request a third party to do it for you, where the VA or the vulnerability assessment part would be most likely they're going to be using a tool, no, to scan your environment, like the likes of Nessus, Qualys, and other vulnerability scanning engines. No? But whatever issues, no, that those VA scan generated, found and generated, it has to be validated still. No? And once you validate it, the next step, no, or one step further, that you could actually determine if that risk is actually present, is do penetration testing. So let's say your vulnerability scanner found, no, a router with a default credentials, no, in the basic sense, no, and yeah, it would say that on your VA scan results, no? But if we want to, let's say, on a smaller scale, do a penetration testing and confirm that findings, no? We would be trying to log in with the credential found to the router and figure out if we could actually log in. So sometimes VA scanners would produce false positive. And if we could do log in, no? Let's say it was a successful scan, no? You got a valid credentials there. Is it a critical asset? From that router, could we jump to other components of the network? Or maybe that credential found by the scanner is a credential used across other device that wasn't scanned, that wasn't part of the target, yung initial scanning. So maybe we could reuse that credential because we know IT's users, they use credentials. So if we find one valid credential, it is likely that is also used across other equipments and systems. So that's, I would say, penetration testing. So aside from the proactive way, no, to determine vulnerabilities and security issues, no, they ORAN wants you to detect. And to detect, no, you need to be logging, no, a lot of these events in both OS and application level. So been doing incident response and responding to various breaches. Some of them you see in the news. I've been tasked to help them out. One thing that I would usually encounter is they are logging just the OS though. The application level, it's a bit wonky on what kind of data we could see on the application level. But the problem is the attacks nowadays especially if it's coming via APIs and web applications, no, it has to be on the application level. Okay, so you need to be aware, no, that what are the key events in both OS and app. We need to be logging it, and we need to be sending all these logs, no, to a central location of our log aggregator, sometimes called the SIM, where all of these components and applications are sending their logs, and now you have a single source of truth. No, consider it's a logbook of a security guard in your building, and if your security guard is very uh, meticulous, no, on logging on who went in, who went out, what equipment was brought in, what equipment was brought out, no, you'll have this analytics, no, na you could apply on those logs, and you would be able to determine, no, what happened, and then you could crunch that data. No? Let's say uh, on the basic sense, no, for the tech, you have a very small amount of users, so you typically have 10, 20 failed logins a day. Users figuring out their passwords. And then, and if your security guard is very uh, meticulous, no, on logging on who went in, who went out, what equipment was brought in, what equipment was brought out, no, you'll have this analytics, no, na you could apply on those logs, and you would be able to determine, no, what happened, and then you could crunch that data. No? Let's say on the basic sense, no, for the tech, you have a very small amount of users, so you typically have 10, 20 failed logins a day. Users figuring out their passwords. And then suddenly on a weekend, no, when you analyze the logs, you found that you have 200 invalid logins. So that's a huge step, no, from your usual baseline of 20. No? So you could have your system trigger that for you. No? Okay, our usual is around 20 failed logins. No, if we reach around 30, so just so even a small bump, no, you could send an alert to the security team, no, to be able to start figuring out, is this an attack? Is this really just lots of users having a wrong password, which most likely is not? Or is it a script, no, that is trying to log in, no, but an admin changed the password already and forgot to change the script, hence the spike in failed logins. No? But you would only be able to determine that if you are logging the source, destination, and the events. We also want to protect. So we want to apply best practices, no, to prevent intrusion. So we have discussions in a bit, no, CIS and NIST, zero trust philosophy, and proactive controls, no, like firewall, WAF, and intrusion prevention systems. So for ORAN, security focus group, no, they have this test specification recommendation. As you can see here, no, the robustness of well-known protocols like SSH, TLS, DTLS, and IPsec is being recommended to be used in Open RAN. No need to invent the wheel. It has been known to function as expected. So you just have to tweak it. So they have some recommendation on what versions to use, what cipher suites are recommended, and certificate management too. For passwords, discussed it a bit, no? Good password policies, releases against brute force and authorized resets. Of course, MFA. Also have vulnerability scanning at the infra, application level, and even fuzzing. They're recommending fuzzing. They also want you to have some protection against denial of service, against protocol flooding attacks at all layers, and many more. No? That's still being discussed now, as we see. Next is we have Zero Trust Architecture, no, as part of the protection framework. So this was coined in 1994 by Stephen Paul Marsh with the moniker Never Trust, no, but always verify, which is good. We should trust but verify. No? It's never trust. No? So you don't trust anything, even your workstations, even your users. No? Such a paranoid way to do it. But I'd say this is something, no? It's implemented. It was done and coined not 30 years ago. So most of us haven't been born yet. Then I think. So we have this statement here from Zero Trust. Devices should not be trusted by default, no? Even if they're connected to a permission network, such as a corporate LAN, and if they were previously verified. So every time you have to validate. Because you never know. One of the machines in your environment could already be infected, no? And since you gave it a lot of trust, all the actions would be permitted. So, like the traditional approach, no, of trusting these devices is not relevant in complex environment of a corporate network. Again, you are banking on the likelihood, no, that a system is already compromised. You don't know about it, so why would you allow full access on a specific machine where this machine is only tasked to do specific tasks, no, and connect to specific parts of the network? So you want to basically contain as part of the one of the best benefit of zero trust is in case there's any breach, it's gonna be easy to contain. In case that threat actors try something that is not out of the baseline, you should be easily able to detect them. Okay. But that said, no, it's not easy to implement zero trust. You have to define all the policies way before as well. So principles definition, no, again, this is uh, items that you might want to consider for zero trust deployment. So one is single strong source of user identity. You cannot have a good implementation of zero trust if you have multiple user databases. Typically, you'll have a domain controller or an LDAP, no, where it's the single source of user identity. Where if a user resign, no, or just change the password, no, you just have to change one and everything else would be changed. No? It's not going to be allowed in old credentials. It's going to be also easier for you to contain. So in case, let's say, I don't use a directory for my users, and I think my password is compromised, no? And I have 200 machines. That would mean, no, each and every one of those machines would have their local identity database, no? And I would have to change each and every one of those passwords across those 200 machines. No? But what if it's actually 201 machine because of a machine I configured 3 months ago and I forgot to document it? No? I might miss it, but the attacker might find that one machine that I haven't changed the password. So that's going to be catastrophic for the organization. And one thing I've noticed here, no, Linux users and the system administrators, no, tend to have their local accounts, no, be the directory for that system. I seldom see sysads of Linux systems use directories, no, like LDAP or a domain controller, to authenticate their credentials. Typically, they would contain it on a local. So that's gonna be hard to maintain, no, if not very dangerous, no, for a zero trust design infrastructure, because again, if you miss a credential, then attacker might find it and use it against you. The thing is, you as an admin, no, you need to ideally do everything right. Okay? But the attacker only needs to find, no, one mistake, no, and they would be able to get in. So that also ties up, no, with user authentication and machine authentication. So even machines should be authenticated with zero trust principle and definition. So if you haven't touched on this, no, you might want to check on 8021X. It's one of the most common way for machine, no, to be associated to the network and authenticate first. So what's happening with 8021X is you plug a device or on the wireless network, and while you are somehow connected to the network, the APs or the switch now will not activate yet the route, the connectivity to the network part. You would have to provide, no, with a machine username and a password, and the switch would ask the radio server, no, may this machine claiming to be machine number one has this username and password. Could you check radios? No? And the radios is just a relay, no, and doesn't have actually the directories, no. So it would cascade it to the LDAP or domain controller and ask, no, is it a valid password? So if it's a valid password, it would relay, the domain controller would relay it back to the radios, and then the radios would relay it back to the switch. And the switch would say, okay, you are a valid machine, then I'm going to open up the connectivity part. So that's the only time you would be connected to the network if the machine is able to present a valid credentials. If it doesn't, no, let's say the authentication fails, then the switch would shut down the port or the access point would disconnect you from the network because you haven't provided a valid credentials to it. So you need to also have, of course, policy compliance ng equipment, no? And devices. So sample of this would be some sort of a network access control where you connect to the network, you're authenticated, good. But next is they would check, no? Do you have antivirus? Is it updated within the last 24 hours? Is your firewall turned on? Do you have patches for your OS? Do you have patches for your apps? Okay? So those are some context, no, for that device, no? And while you are authenticated, no, if you fail any of those, no, the system, the environment would move you to what we call a purgatory network, no, or a limbo network where you cannot access. You're connected to the environment, but you are contained. And what you could access from that purgatory network is updates. So you could now start downloading antivirus patches. And once everything is applied, no, the network access agent, no, would try to re-authenticate to the system and say, hey, I'm already updated. Please get me back into the network. That's the only time they would allow you inside. Okay. The next is authorization policies to access an application. This is an issue where a lot of people are still, even in security, having a hard time figuring out the difference between authentication and authorization. So, authentication is what you are. Sorry. It's the process of sending credentials and identifying on who you are or who you say you are based on the username and password or other credentials you presented. So that's authentication. Authorization is what are you authorized to do with that once you have been identified. No? So it's two different things. What's happening is if they miss that definition is they would allow any authenticated users to do anything on the environment. So without any authorization checks. So that your application, your system should have authorization checks in place. And I kid you not, I see not even so. No, I still see a lot of complex system that the designer uh, did not implement authorization checks because what their mindset was, as long as you're authenticated, you are authorized, which it's not. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. There's also access control policies within the application where let me just give you a basic example. Let's say you're logging into your bank. You are authenticated. Okay, you are authorized to access your account, right? But what if the bank failed to do authorization checks, which has happened, which is still happening, no? On mobile apps or web application banking systems? What if I request for account details, but I change the account number to something that someone I'm targeting with? If there is no authorization check and there's only, are you authenticated? Yes, then the system would give you data that's not supposed to be seen by you because you are not technically authorized to access other person's account. You're only authorized to access your account, but designers forgot to do authorization check and they thought that no one's gonna tamper the requests. So everything should be in a happy path, no? But that's not always the case. No? Attackers would modify account numbers, destination accounts, source accounts, balance, no? And send it. No? And if the system do not have proper authorization policies and access control policies, then that's when you're gonna have security issues. So for this one, the zero trust architecture, no, we have a documentation from NIST, 59 pages, roughly 3 hours of reading time. Okay. So next module is defense in depth. This is when defending a system against any particular attack, no, using several independent methods because we know that some controls might fail and we want another control to be able to handle it for you. So sample I would say here is let's say you have everyone has an email now in their corporate environment. Someone sent you a malware via email. The email server would initially check, no, if that email address and domain is valid, if the reputation is good, and then they would accept that message. No? And sometimes attackers would compromise a known good domain, no? And use that as a jumping point to send other malware. So that in turn bypasses the initial checks of the email server. Once the email server receives, no, that message or malware or link, no, typically it would have an antivirus engine to scan that malware or that link, no? And the threat actor knows this, no? That the initial connection to that domain most likely is going to be the email scanner. So it's going to provide you a generic page, no? That's not how do you call this, malicious. Okay. And then lastly, assuming it passes that initial scan, no? What the next one would be your machine, your email client would be getting that email, and then the user would be clicking on that link. And hopefully at that time, no, your antivirus would be able to detect, no, oops, that's a malicious item. No? So you're going to be alerted on it. So even with that example, no, you could see that there are various controls independent of each other, trying to protect you, no, or the user or the system, no, against these attacks. And if you take a look at just specifically for the workstation antivirus, that's the last level of protection you have. Meaning, if a malware is suddenly trying to write or trying to be downloaded on that machine, it's almost game over for you. It means it has passed through a lot of your security mechanisms, your next-gen firewall, your sandbox, your security solutions, your reputation checks. It's already on your machine. At that point, it just hasn't executed yet. Okay, but yeah, there's a lot of control that has to be penetrated against, no, before it reaches your machine now. But by the time you are starting to detect malware in your machine, you could now ask, no, what kind of control has this malware bypassed, no, before it to reach my workstation or laptop. Okay. So they have divided defense in depth across various controls, no, like physical, technical, admin. No, if they cannot provide physical and technical controls, then you have some policies against it. Typically HR policies, no, or security policies. No, now you cannot do this, you cannot do that. No, let's say laptop. No, there are agencies that I've encountered that they cannot bring their work outside the country. So if they suddenly bring the laptop abroad, no, that's gonna be a administrative violation. You could have some technical limitations there where if suddenly you see that laptop logging in from IP not within your country, then that would be some sort of detection, and you could now enforce the administrative control against that. So principles is you need to have uniform protections, no, across the same level of protection. You have secure enclaves to protect the data, no? And ultimately what we're protecting here is the data. Okay, it's information centric, and we need to protect this sensitive information. You also want to conduct, no, threat vector analysis, where it's some sort of threat modeling, no, where you try to figure out what's the way to get in, a threat to get in your environment, and if you could shut down that vector, then or minimize, no, the event from happening, then you should be able to mitigate, no, these attacks. So there is this documentation from CISA.gov for defense in depth, 58 page, roughly around 3 hours estimate to run this. Next, we have principle of least privilege. So again, fundamental concept in security that you are only given the minimum permission for you to require, no, for you to complete their task. And that the thing, the common goal, if you've seen the previous slides, was I want to be able to minimize the damage, no? In case something goes wrong, all of this privilege that you have on your account or your access should be as minimal as possible, and any misuse, no, would easily be detected. Let's say you are only allowed to log into machine A, B, and C. Suddenly, your account's trying to log into machine D. Okay? The system of principle of least privilege should shut it down, no, and it should be reported, basically. that something is going on with your account. Okay. Next, we have the NIST cybersecurity framework. So this is organized by function: identity, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So these are 5 widely used terms, no, for comprehensive view of life cycle for managing cybersecurity online. Right. For the NIST identify, we want basically the organizations, no, to uh, develop, no, and understand, no, what are the assets, the systems, the data capabilities, because we want to identify, including the processes too, no? To identify these critical items in the enterprise, because we had this saying, no? It's hard to protect an environment where you don't know, no, what you're trying to protect. So you need to be able to identify the system, document information flows, maintain hardware and software inventory. Looks easy, no? But I assure you, most organizations would not have a single source of inventory, no? That they could identify how much laptops we have, how much workstations and servers we have. These servers, what kind of ports do they are they servicing? No? So very few companies have been able to do that. No? But again, it's gonna be hard for you to protect, no, what they don't know about. You need to have policies for cybersecurity include roles and responsibilities. And once you have identified the assets, now you need to identify now the threats, vulnerabilities, and risks to these assets. So what we've seen a while ago with the risk analysis in ORA. So once you have identified that, we need to start, no, part of the risk assessment. Need to develop, no, strategies and safeguards, no, for this to manage access to assets and informations. Identify the data where it is, protect it, conduct regular backup because availability issues is part of the protection that we need, aside from threat of ransomware attacks. No? So if you don't have a backup, then a ransomware could be very catastrophic for your organization. But it is catastrophic, no? But it could be worse, no? If you cannot restore your environment because your backups are not there. And thing to note with backups right now, no? You need to have an offline backup because ransomware operators have been known, and I've seen them, gone for the backups because they know that if you don't have a backup, chances of you coordinating and negotiating with them for payment would be high. Uh, so you need to have a backup and you need to have an offline backup for you to have a fighting chance. Protect your devices, EDRs, AVs, always keep them patched and updated. Don't use your device and browse to unknown websites. No? When part of the maybe is also patching, and we need to train users, no? Awareness. What is out there, how are they attacked, no? So the more aware, the more they see, no, how attacks are conducted, and how risky it is to download links or click on messages. They ideally, no, it would increase, no, your organization's resilience against a cyber attack. Then we want to detect, no, develop and implement ways, no, to identify any occurrence of an anomaly. Any detection rule, no, must be tested and updated as necessary. And then again, note the expected data flow. As mentioned, no, if your machine is just expected to log into machine A, B, and C, suddenly it's trying to log into machine X, no, that should raise an alert, no, in your detect process. But the only way for you to do that is to be able to collect these logs and monitor it. No, some sort of automation, but some sort of validation too after the fact. Okay. Now for the respond, once you detected, no, something, no, that's weird, need to take actions. No, validate it, confirm it's an attack. No, if it's not, then just write off as false positive. There should be response plans, no, in place, and it should have been tested. You don't want to test your response plan while there's an ongoing incident. You would be making a lot of mistake there. Coordinate with internal and external stakeholders. Ideally, you should have been doing tabletop too. No? So tabletop exercises are simulated attacks where you are trying to figure out, no, what are the gaps in our plan and how are our users reacting to it. Now, in case there's really an attack, no, and you have detected it and you have responded to it or able to contain them, now you want to recover your operations, no, for resiliences, and restore no, any capabilities or services that were impaired no, due to this cyber attack. And then also you need to communicate with internal and external stakeholders. No? Disclose what happened no, and what they're doing to make it better. Of course, sometimes you need to taper down the details too. So that would depend on the situation. And then any gaps no, that you've discovered on your recovery plans. Okay? You need to document it and ensure no, what went wrong, what could we do to make it better, what went good also. So that's only wrong. So again, this incident would be an input no, so that any future incident must smooth sailing yung uh, recovery. No? And then of course, if this is a very public breach, you need to do public relations and manage your company's reputation. Okay, so there's a NIST cybersecurity framework. I think the version 2 is already out. This one is 51 pages and estimated 5 hours if you want to read more. Last component is CIS. It's a non-profit entity that have design guideline and best practices for securing IT systems. So they're basically a combination of various federal, US government agencies and private institutions. No? And they come up with these 18 controls. Used to be 20, but they were able to consolidate it to 18 that they said na if all organizations would implement this, they would be protected against majority of today's threats. So even nation-state APTs, cyber criminals, commodity malware, even script kiddies. So this, well, we don't have time to identify each and every one of this, no? But if you want to take a look at this, no, there is 18 controls. And if you take a look at number 1 and 2, no, it's inventory, like with NIST identified. They have something in common. I would say this one is more detailed, where you have you need to have inventory of and control of enterprise assets. This is the harder part. The number 2 would be control of software assets. But you could even see here, no? Let's say control number 7, vulnerability management. You got 8, no? Audit log management. You got 9, email and web browser protection. 10, malware defenses. 11, the data recovery and others. So this is very comprehensive controls, no? Now you want to take a look. And they also have this categories, no? Like IG1 for small companies, IG2 for enterprise with data that needs to be really protected, no? And IG3, no, for very secure organizations like banks or financial institutions, no. But even though you're not a bank or financial institution, you might want to go for IG3, especially if you're operating for with Open RAN. Okay. And for you, no, Tigay, no, you could try to look at audit scripts. This is an Excel file available for download, where you could score yourself. No, you got here your dashboard across 18 controls. You'll get a score no, after your self-assessment, and then you could present this to management no, and say, okay, based on our self-assessment, our maturity rating is 1.5. No, it's not bad. The target is of course 5, no, but it's gonna be hard, very hard to do, no. But you could say, no, okay, we're at 1.5, no. Our target is we want to be at 2.2 by next year. So with all these controls, we are that we have gaps, no. We could now try to determine which of these control has high impact for us with less resource required no, to implement. And if you go, let's say, to CSC number 1, no, they have this control detail, and then you could check on the right side. No? Is there a policy defined for that control? Is the control being implemented? Is it automated? Is it being reported? So you just drop down and identify where you are here, and then you'll give you a score no, per control, and then you have a summary towards the end no, across all the controls. So you have a benchmark, you have a number to work on. And that's why I consider this a very good starting point no, for assessing your organization. So even though you're not operating ORA, if you have an IT infrastructure, you want to check your baseline security, take a look at CIS, critical security controls, and this Excel sheet for self-assessment would actually be a good starting point for you guys. So you could download a detailed document from CIS, no? 87 pages, roughly 5 hours of read time then. But very good detail, I would say. If you want to implement security, if you can comply to most of it, good. No? And this could be your jumping off point, no? To maybe an ISO certification, ISO 27001. But by then, konti na lang yung need nyo to implement. Another thing with CIS is they have this called CIS benchmark where you could specify the operating system or the database or application that you have, and then you could download the CIS benchmark, and it could give you it has instructions on how to make it secure based on their recommendations, like this one. Ensure use of privilege command is collected. So this just means that any command performed by root would have logs and for audit, no, at some point. And you could send this log to a central location too. So this is just one of an example of a control for Ubuntu using CIS benchmarks. Okay. And we had that exercise in class, no, where you are required to install an Ubuntu in a VM, and then you implement most recommendations in CIS benchmark around 8 hours. Then, of course, you could download it here. Next activity in our class was using that Ubuntu VM, no? Clone it, then you'll be tasked, no, to run a Nessus vulnerability scanner and figure out, no, what are the vulnerabilities that is located on patch Ubuntu 20.04. And then you have two methods, no? An authenticated scan, meaning you don't have credentials, and then the second method would be you would be authenticating to the machine and figuring out there's a lot more vulnerabilities that weren't seen from the network side. Then you have to document the findings. Okay.